Alright, so this is where things get a little bit more complicated. The biggest issue I had trying to figure out how I wanted to write this is that the four volumes have. There's theoretically one for every one of the four main characters involved in all of this, and I knew who the second focus character was going to be, and I knew who the final focus character was going to be, just based on their where they are in their character arcs at the time of each part of the story. But the first and third, I wasn't sure. Because the one with the most change by the end of the story is not the one who leaves the biggest impact at the end of the first volume. So the idea being that in order for these kids to be taught, back in ye olden days when the Scarlet Order was first started, it was basically one or two proteges per hero, because the idea was to exponentially increase, because you're going to have more kids that need the training than you have heroes to cover it. But it was still relatively new, and they wanted to keep it pretty mitigated, pretty under control, and make sure they were keeping an eye on the mentors and the students alike. As the Scarlet Order ballooned in size, it became a lot more manageable that if you had one bad teacher or one bad influence, that things would kind of shift accordingly. That there would be enough heroes trained that if even one person went rogue, there would be enough responses. And the actual tale of the artifacts left behind by the Lightning Queen kind of faded into myth. Even the keys weren't really talked about. It wasn't really passed around. It was just kind of literally folklore, even in the Scarlet Order. People who got higher up in the Order and were trusted heroes, they were aware that it was fact, but they usually never had to interact with it. Nobody had any idea who had these aeons, these living keys. They'd only heard about it, and they knew that if they crossed paths, they knew what it was. So we pick up the story, the original idea, had four kids all kind of they had all their own hero origin stories going for them. You had Cain, who had his dead parents and his dead mentor, and he would get picked up by a hero known as Dusk. And Dusk's entire gimmick, it's not bad luck, though he does feel like he doesn't have any luck. He does feel like he's pretty much accursed. But his whole gimmick is he used to have an adventuring party. He used to have a group he would travel with. And then one day, similar to what happened to Braun's Village, they all kind of died. Due to no fault of his own, just random chance. And unlike Braun, who took it personally and tried to go into retirement, Dusk just kind of got quiet. But Dusk's paradox gene is the ability to seal away people's emotions. He can absolutely shut you down completely. And he can do it to himself too, but it's an active, like, he can put a lock on you. He can just straight lock you up. It's not something that requires any effort, he just needs to initiate it. Early on in his life, he claims that there was various aspects to it, but in his particular case, he can basically turn anybody he wants into a sociopath. And if somebody's already a sociopath, he can try and initiate emotions into them, or at least make an effort to. And you would think that that's not overly handy in a fight, until you realize that a lot of people in the middle of a fight block out their emotions. They lock that part of them away. They lock away their fear. They lock away... So if somebody's being really cold and effective, you can throw them off by forcing them to feel the emotions they're blocking out. Or if somebody's trying to fight you in a blind rage or is in a panic, you can lock away their emotions for a hot minute to help them think with a clear head. And Dusk uses that very tactically to his advantage. He's not a fool. So it's one of those things where if he thinks somebody's being too hard-headed and dumb, he'll unlock their emotions, figure out what they're really feeling, and try and appeal through that. Whereas if he thinks somebody is lashing out and being melodramatic, he'll help them to calm down so they can see the more logical road forward. It really is one of those things that it would depend on use. But Dusk is the first person to pick up Cain because Bronzo had sent out a letter beforehand telling the Scarlet Order, hey, this kid just turned 18. He's got all the makings of one of us. I want to send him to the Crimson Keep, which is the southern continent bastion of the Scarlet Order. I want to send him to the Crimson Keep for training. I wanted to make sure he was ready before he went, though. And Dusk finds him a couple weeks after the death of Bronzo. Who he's sad that Bronzo's dead, but he kind of saw it coming. Dude has not been himself since his wife died. But he wasn't going to sit there and tell Kane that. He's just going to go, yeah, no, that makes sense. And he brings Kane with him to the Crimson Keep, and Kane brings Nirvana with him, with his master's old sword gun. The one that his mom had forged, as well as a few strips of metal that his mom had made, the composite metal that she made, and, of course, his 7 swords, which, at this stage, due to how much force he had put on the grip of the heavy blade on his back, the handle is actually grooved to his hand. Like, he dented the handle, so now it's shaped to his hand. So even if somebody else picked it up, it would be really awkward and not really work for them. So you got that going for him. And he's got the leather jacket with the symbol of the Phoenix on the back, which he had always been raised by his mom, was a family heirloom from Sean Phoenix. Not by name, just like, hey, we have an ancestor, he was the first Phoenix on the southern continent, and this is his jacket. And it really is within the Phoenix family kind of tradition that if you do not have a hand-me-down jacket, you find one of your own and emblazon your family symbol on it, which kind of becomes a whole thing. So Kane is picked up by Dusk. Then we go to our secondary, the second of our 4 main protagonists. She's a beastkin who was very much a, bookworm nerd for the last few years, and she's already a part of the Scarlet Order. She's been there for a few years. But due to her kind of bookwormy nature, nobody really noticed her. She was pulling down straight A's, and she was very skilled, but nobody was really paying attention. She had an adopted brother that was not Beastkin, who was really into the cause, really into the whole protesting and proving, Beastkins were not less than anybody else. And he was a couple years older than her, and he had gone to the southern continent ahead of her. So when the protest groups in the southern continent got a little bit more violent, and a little bit more, pro-Beastkin, less everybody else, she was worried for his safety because he hadn't sent any letters out. He hadn't told her where she was. He had not said where he was to her. So she figured she would transfer down to the Crimson Keep and kind of, feel it out. Find out where he went and, track him down. And if she was going to a new school anyway, she might as well reinvent herself. So she cuts her hair short, and she wears a suit and a tie and dresses up like a super spy from her favorite books, like Shades, suit, everything. And she does nothing to overtly tell anybody what she is, but due to her rather lithe figure and her super spy suitness, she does nothing to disabuse the notion, but people think that she's just a rather effeminate boy at the school, for the most part. Her team figures her out pretty quick. If I recall correctly, Kane literally was not fooled for a single second. And her other team members really, they weren't going to ask. They were just going to leave it be. But they weren't fooled either. It's mostly, that was one of my favorite aspects of the team chemistry, is that Olive, which is her name is Olive Merlinus, she is very much keen on trying to keep people off balance. She trolls people, she'll do double speak, she'll do all kinds of manipulations and half-truths, and it's very kind of half-angsty, because she doesn't want people to know why she's here, and she's used to people ignoring her. And so messing with people who think they know her is just so much easier than being honest. And her team has her figured out pretty much instantly, which at first has her completely flustered, but eventually shows her that there are people in the world that see her for who she is. and she gets rather close to her team during the course of the first volume because of that. But since her quest is to find her older brother and to figure out what he's doing, and kind of look into these extremists to see, because they're bringing a bad name to the cause that her parents raised her on. Her parents raised her that it was your merits, that if you proved your worth, that you wouldn't have to deal with any of this stuff, right? And so you have these violent extremists bringing shame to the whole idea. And she came down to save her brother and maybe even try and convince these people to knock it off. She wasn't sure she could, but she's young. She's only like 17. She still thinks she can change the world single-handedly. So that was her goal. Join the Scarlet Order, find her brother, stop the extremists. Probably the one who has the most things to do in this character arc. Which is why when I recently tried revisiting, I thought about writing the volume about her, but she's not the one who, for lack of a better explanation, peaks in this one. The only other character that, and this is why I discussed them both first. Cain was the original focus character, but his plot in the first volume, while he does peak here, he doesn't really develop much. He comes in with this survivor's guilt mentality of, I'm going to pretend to be the hero I want to inspire everybody else to be, even though I don't think that I can be that myself. But if I put on my smile and I put on my brave face, I will inspire somebody who can be that hero to step up and believe that the world can be a better place. That was his whole thing. And even as his ideals of unbound hope just, even self-destructive sacrifices are made by Cain during this volume, frankly. And he makes a big impression for the better on a lot of characters during this time. He himself doesn't really grow much. He's just constantly fighting his survivor's guilt and feels unworthy to be in the Crimson Keep because he got his parents killed in his mind, and he got his mentor killed in his mind. To him, he's a bad omen. He gets people killed. Which doesn't help when something else happens later in the story that we'll get to later. But that's where he starts. He starts when he gets to the Crimson Keep, trying to put on a brave face and trying to be a hero, but believing himself to be an omen of death. And that doesn't change much through the story. So it would make sense to have the person who's doing the most in the story be the focus character. But the end of Volume 1 wouldn't hit the same if she was. So I'm torn. So instead I'm just going to tell you the history. So Cain shows up under recommendation from Bronzo. Olive transfers from a different academy. And then we get to the next character, who is Zoge LeBlanc. See, Zoge Oceana had been a successful hunter at his time, and he had left quite the impression on the world, and it was the common first name of the Oceana family. Like, for the firstborn son, Zoge was the only way to go. Technically, he was Zoge the Third. So it wasn't uncommon during that time period for children to be named Zoge. Like, the men of the northern continent would often have their children be named Zoge, out of respect for not only him, but his fathers before him. So it was a rather common name. It's like John at that point. So we have Zoge LeBlanc. And he was a child that came from the Northern Library. And after experimenting with some of the locked away tomes, he kind of forced his paradox gene to activate, which it's not supposed to do. He was doing it to see, to do the experiment, to learn the knowledge and figure out if he even had one. And he forced his paradox gene to activate, which was unfortunate for him, because it formed a poisonous aura around his left arm that would not abate. There were specific bandages that the monks had made to contain it, but it's even with that, he's going to be lucky to live beyond the age of 40. And he will be pretty much crippled by the time he's 35. And so he left the monastery to join the Scarlet Order in hopes that before he dies, he can do something productive with his short lifespan. Because if this doesn't stop, he's going to be completely useless. He's not going to be able to live out a full life. So he only has a limited window to get the job done. And he's very much he's a genius child, but he's a complete sociopath. He doesn't see the point in viewing things as heroes and villains. He thinks there is such a thing as objective, measurable good, but the idea of a hero, the idea of burning yourself out and dying a noble death, is highly impractical if you can live longer and accomplish more good in the long term. Very utilitarian, very pragmatic. He thinks the ideals of a hero are foolish. And he and Cain start... It's hard to explain. I wouldn't say they start at odds with each other. I would say that it was actually kind of what Cain needed to spur himself. Because you have Cain, who he may not think he's qualified. And for all we know, he's not. But he believes in the ideals of a hero, and he believes in what they inspire in others. And Zogade believes that the role of the Scarlet Order and all the folk heroes that come out of it is a utilitarian one. Perpetuate the species, protect it from outside threats, and preserve enough lives before you die to make a difference in the world. He has read all of these stories, and he doesn't buy into the high noble ideas. He sees past it to the ugly humanity underneath, and how a lot of these things, they were not always pure good, but they intended to be. And so it creates that kind of dynamic of Zoge doesn't believe in heroes, but he understands the good that can be done by a self-sacrificing person. He doesn't think it's okay to put them on a pedestal or think the world of them. He doesn't understand the function of that. And Cain is trying to show him the function of that by aspiring for greater ideals than one can achieve, you become the best version of yourself and inspire others to exceed the good you've done. And the two would discuss it at length, because Cain internally doesn't fully believe his own words, and Zoge is kind of hoping he's wrong, because he doesn't have much in the world, and having somebody that has faith in him and believes in a higher ideal, it's nice. He might be a sociopath, incapable of empathy, but just having somebody who encourages him to, try harder, to not just assume his life is already over, it was oddly pleasant for him. And then you have the final member, who I was sitting on her backstory intentionally, because her backstory does go into the events pre-novel, but it's complicated. So her name is Amaranthine Salvia. She is the daughter of Wynne Salvia and the granddaughter of Lord Lucas. And she is effectively, functionally, a princess. She is the child of nobility. She is the heiress, for what it matters. Even though she has two older brothers, she is still considered one of the important children in the House of Salvia, because she's a potential heir. When she was only about 2 to 3 years old, a group of bandits came and kidnapped her, and they wanted Wynne to provide them. There was some requests for gold and food and money out there, sure, but the real goal, and Wynne was not fooled for a minute, was they had been hired by lesser nobles to inspire a sense of weakness in him, to give the impression that Wynne could be bullied, pushed around. And if that was the case, then they could get their way, and they could supplant House Salvia and take the lands for themselves, and treat the people poorly. And Wynne found himself in a difficult spot. This was his daughter, his child, and he was not about to take that lying down, but he very well couldn't show a single sign of weakness, or countless more people would suffer. That was when Rosa Lotus, offered to... she said, you should go in there and charge in there and kill him. He goes, I can't do that. I cannot go in and kill my constituents. I can't show that I answer this stuff with raw brutality. That would just make me look exactly like Lord Lotus. My hands are very much tied. The only thing I can do is sit here and wait for more reasonable terms. And then the two exchanged a look. And Rosa smiled and said, the head of House Salvia cannot be seen acting in such a brutal and efficient way. I understand you. I think we get each other. Rosa then, without further consultation, and without further anything else, made her way to the village where Amaranthine, or Amy as she's called most of the series, but where Amy was being held hostage. And when she first arrived, Amy was excited. This was her grandmother, this legendary warrior. She was finally going to see her in action. It was great. And then Rosa proceeded to do what she did everywhere. She activated her paradox gene, instilled immense fear, took great pleasure in massacring these people brutally, their blood staining the very walls, laughing like a maniac the whole time. And the entire thing horribly scarred Amy. Amaranthine was unable to forget this ever. And it came as a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, she was so thankful to her grandmother, who was always so gentle with her. Even after she saved her, she carried her home with a very gentle expression on her face and very kind to her granddaughter. But she couldn't forget the brutality she had seen at such a young age. So when Amy's paradox gene manifested and she was able to use that to be a more effective swordswoman, she decided she wanted to be just like her grandmother, just a part of the tradition. Bring back those honorable swordswomen of old. But she has horrific and crippling hemophobia. A single drop of blood is enough to have her go pale and get lightheaded. She can't handle blood to save her life. Literally. And that is important. So she finds herself hesitating because she doesn't want to inflict any wound that will draw blood. Instead, she finds other ways to deal with her problems, and she's very skilled because her paradox gene is that she can slow her perception of time. And that, similar to Dusk, you would think, oh, well, that doesn't sound overly useful because you're not moving any faster or anything like that. But to the eyes of a trained warrior, and one that's, very skilled and very fast in their own right, being able to see every single subconscious muscle movement of your opponent and see things coming well before they've even hit you, it gives you way more time to react and way more time to act. Especially with the fighting style her father had shown her, as far as how to move swiftly with the blade, and almost how to create, for lack of a better explanation, slipstreams with your blade. She could move faster than people too, because she knew how to move effectively. Keep in mind, Wynn, her father, has no paradox gene, and the dude is considered one of the most dangerous swordsmen on the planet. There are people with greater skills than him, theoretically, because of their paradox genes, but there's not a single person who's ever bested him in sword combat. The man is a legend when it comes to swordplay. So she had one of the best tutors possible. And he didn't know how he felt about her becoming a warrior, especially knowing of her fear of blood, but he figured letting her go to the Crimson Keep would either help her to accomplish her dream, or help her to realize that she's not strong enough to overcome that weakness in her own heart. He figured it was a safe place because of all the heroes that are usually at the Crimson Keep. It's not usually a problem. And that's our initial team. We have Zoge LeBlanc, the sociopath from the north, who doesn't believe in heroes and is trying to do some good before he dies. You have Kane, the man with survivor's guilt, who puts on a brave face and pretends to be a hero of old, even as he's secretly worrying he'll get everybody killed. You have Olive, the perpetual liar who's here for spy work and counterintelligence against violent protests. Just entirely self-prepared as she's on a quest to find her brother. And then you have Amy, the blood-phobic warrior princess who's scary with a sword. And initially they're all training under Dusk, who kind of relates to Kane's fear of being an omen of death. Because again, Dusk kind of feels like he's cursed too, so he gets it. But Dusk gets called away because of some odd behavior in the broad scheme of things. Something that ever since the events in the north that happened to the royalty, the Crimson Keep in particular has been on alert because the Scarlet Order from the northern continent had warned them that something was off. And with the more aggressive behavior from the animals in the woods, they also believed that there was something here that was causing the issue. The resident agent of for lack of a better explanation, the LeBlancs, but the library keepers, the people who kept the records, the resident agent was very keen on making clear these kinds of movements were very specific, and yet so vague they were hard to nail down. It was behavioral modification, and that's not something that's normal. It's not normal for somebody to be able to, modify other people's behavior. Dusk himself was already had an eye kept on him because of his ability to manipulate people's emotions. So they were concerned. He, of course, didn't mind being kept on close watch because he had nothing to hide, and he's kind of a drunken murderer, so he's not worried about it. But that was the general idea, is that, we have to keep an eye on this because there's some odd behavior. Not only are these protesters getting a little bit more violent than we were expecting, but even the criminal underworld is starting to behave funny, and the wildlife is becoming a little bit more aggressive than we're used to. There's something not right here. There's somebody or something has their eyes set on us, and we need to be ready for it. They didn't know what it was, but they were there. And a part of the military from the north, they were feeling like they were being kept in the dark from the Scarlet Order, and to a degree they were, because this is not a political issue. This is a much larger global issue. But they were trying to figure out how they can do that. So one of their commanders called in a favor from a warrior maiden of the Scarlet Order, who he had helped train in the cross-training between the military and the Scarlet Order in the first place. He approached her and he said, her name is Contrassa Greenwich. Contrassa Greenwich. And she is the perfect person for this job, because she actively chose the Scarlet Order over the military, and she's been kind of a rogue agent from the status quo of the northern continent, which makes her not really a suspicious figure to send at all. And the general approached her on the favor of, if the Scarlet Order is hiding something from us, we are not going to be able to defend our people. Innocent people can die and suffer if we don't know what's going on. So he sends her to the south, and she arrives not really knowing what's going on, but just around the same time Dusk had to go accomplish his mission of investigating further these weird disturbances. And she ends up, just because they had no other available mentors, she's the one who ends up in charge of our group of 4. Now, Contrassa is an interesting sort. Not only is she kind of a renegade, but she has a one-sided crush on a fellow trainee from her youth who decided to side with the military instead of staying with the Scarlet Order. And she's not... Her ability is that she can bend light around her body. She can actively manipulate, refraction around her body, and even absorb light to release it later. Just, compress it around her body, and then allow that to uncompress and kind of form a flashbang. Because I don't know if anybody knows this, but if light moves, if highly compressed light uncompresses, it does create a sound disturbance as well. I looked into this back then. I don't remember the exact science on it anymore, but back when I made her, I looked into this. So, she can compress light around her body, or bend it around her, so she's basically transparent. It's like active camo. But there's a few different applications, so I have to be specific as to how it works. And she's known as the White Lynx. She wears the most, punk kind of look to her for a winter place, so she's got a crop top winter fluffy coat, a black tank top and cargo pants and boots, just the most obviously signaling, we're gonna say. But that's not who she is as a person. Who she is as a person is counterculture, in essence. She isn't even overly keen on the Scarlet Order, but they let her do as she sees fit. And that's fine by her. She doesn't care for the idea of the structure, but she respects the fact that they respect that she doesn't stand for what they stand for. And so, out of respect, she continues to look out for people, whether it's for the Scarlet Order or just in general. So she comes to the Southern Continent, and she's trying to do an independent, subtle investigation. So what does she do? She goes, well, yeah, I was in the military as a kid. I'm going to take these 4 kids with me as I go and do my thing, and I'm going to frame it as training. We're going to train on the town while I collect info and try and rustle up info on these protesters. And just because she personally, upon getting lay of the land, suspects that the more violent protests is if there's something going on, that would be a hot pressure point, because she's from the north. She's used to the Beastkin having opinions like this, and so she's like, I'm going to assume that if somebody's going to put pressure on anything, they're gonna touch the open wound here. They're gonna put pressure on that. So she starts investigating the more violent protesters, and pretty much within meeting the group, she nails immediately that Olive knows more than she's letting on. That she probably has some contacts in here, not just because she's a Beastkin, but because Olive is double speaking, because she is talking right, because she's trying to be subtle, and Contrassa respects it, because that's how she was as a kid. She's, again, counterculture. She wasn't about to tell the authority, the man, what she was up to and all that. And to her, there's nothing more counterculture than protesting the treatment of these people. Like, she's like, I understand that within the Scarlet Order they don't act this way, but the Scarlet Order isn't everywhere. So fair enough, like, right? And that's... So she goes, alright, I want you to be my eyes on the inside, because the way you talk about them, you're not happy with this violent protest stuff either. And you and I both know that up and killing people is just going to make things worse. That's where you and I are different from them. And like, she talks with these kids. She's still younger than Dusk, not as jaded. And so she's kind of helping them work through their own developmental milestones. She recognizes that Kane has all this trauma carried in him, but she wants to remind him that it doesn't matter what trauma he carries with him. If he does not overcome it, it will show in everything he does, and it will infect any good he does for other people. It will make clear to them that he has no hope, and that's unacceptable. If he wants to make a difference, he has to find something worth fighting for, instead of just casting away his own health and body for the sake of others. In the case of Zoge, she goes, yeah, system sucks. It's rigged, it's broken, that's why I rebel against it, frick it. You gotta do some good before you die, right? But I need you to understand, we are not fighting a one-person, one-generation war. Everything we do is multiple generations, even Contrassa herself. She is inspired not by people in her own family, but by people like Scarlet, who founded the Scarlet Order in the first place to break away from the nobility caste system and to provide a way for things to change outside of any political structure. And she's inspired by Scarlet that way. She's like, look, you need to have an occasional firebrand to burn down a corrupt system so you can rebuild it from scratch, man. You can't just... And you can't burn it completely because there are innocent people inside the building. So what you have to do is you have to burn the unhealthy bits and then renovate. You move people to where it's safe, destroy the old, repair it, move them to the new safety. That's what you gotta do. Because if you don't do that, you're just going to leave people with nothing and nowhere to go. And he didn't buy into it, he really didn't care. But it'll come up later. Contrassa meets Amaranthine, and first off, that completely is impressed by her. There's this, she's impressed not by her swordsmanship, but by the fact that she's even here. Somebody who has such a crippling phobia of blood, it would be easy to be completely averse to the idea of conflict entirely. So she's impressed that Amaranthine had such thankfulness that she was willing to risk crossing paths repeatedly with her phobia just to try and save other people the way she was saved. But she warns her that the world is not a kind place. If you put yourself into a line of work where your worst fear is going to be a constant, then you have to be stronger than that. You have to find a way to you have to find a different line of work, or you have to overcome your fear, and that there's no in between. And once you've made up your mind, you have to see it through to the end. And it's one of those things where she really thinks Amy has it in her, but that she needs to stop pretending that her life is not going to be filled with blood and conflict, because that self-denial that Amaranthine was putting herself through is going to come back to bite her. Not just because Contrasta said so, but actually over the course of the story too. So you have all of that going on. And over the course of Contrasta's investigation, she does in fact find out Olive ends up meeting up with her brother, who is still perfectly fine. In fact, he's a part of the violent extremists, which catches her off guard, and Olive has to recalculate how she's going to approach this. But he makes clear that it's not that he's somehow given up on the cause or that he believes violence is the answer. So he's found a higher calling. He's found somebody he can truly worship as a goddess. So basically, in her mind, he's lost his frickin' mind. But he found somebody he follows that he believes is worthy of his time and attention and affection and love. And she's above all other people. Not just all other women, all other people. She's so brilliant and charismatic and powerful. She's going to change everything. And we are going to change everything. The world needs to be changed. And this is where we are revealed by Olive what her brother's paradox gene is. His name is Periwinkle Merlinus, but he goes by Perry. And Perry's paradox gene is that it comes in 3 stages, but he has to lock direct eye contact with you. No glasses, maybe glasses. I haven't decided on glasses, usually it doesn't come up, but he has to be able to make eye contact with you directly. No shades, no kind of mask over you. But as soon as he does, he doesn't have to maintain it. He just has to make contact once. Even a split second of raw eye contact can be enough for him to maintain his link. Once he's linked with you, it goes in 3 stages of progression. The first is general suggestion. Just kind of, he becomes somewhat extra persuasive. And he can start to, convince your brain of things that you might not otherwise do. You might not otherwise believe, you might not otherwise feel. The second stage is optical illusions. He can control what you see and even the sensations your body has going through their nerves. That's the second stage, is it goes straight to sensory control after suggestiveness. And the final stage is that not only can he do hallucinations, but he can actively sever your ability to move your limbs. He can convince your body that it no longer has the ability to move your left arm, for example. And the higher level he goes through, the less people he can manipulate with it, and the harder it is on him. He will get crippling headaches if he tries going too high a level with too many people for too long. And so he's got a very powerful ability, but it's got a few caveats, and it can cripple him for an extended period of time. But he uses it for sleight of hand in stage magic, because it's a really easy way to do it, right? It's really easy to, convince somebody that what they're seeing is a 3 instead of a 2. So you don't even have to try with your card tricks, really. I mean, he still does, but you don't have to, really. You can convince anybody of anything. You just gotta, know how to say it, know how to present it, make them doubt themselves. And if you're at the lower levels, you can convince a whole crowd that they saw something they didn't. And that's kind of his whole shtick is, while Olive is lying to her team, Perry lies to everybody. And Perry's influence is probably where Olive got it from. So Olive is she's a half cat beastkin, so she has extra sensitive hearing, and she uses that often. She trained her brain so she can use the sound waves similar to echolocation. She can create maps of areas of sounds that bounce off things. Even through walls, she can get a pretty good read on what the layout of the room is, even if she's putting her ear to the wall. Don't ask how this works, it's fantasy bullcrap. But that's her special skill. And so Olive starts using her brother as kind of the in, right? Because her brother's not really a true believer in the violent protests. Her brother is believer of some other nonsense, and while he's not keen on introducing him to her goddess, sorry, I got tricked up, but he's not interested in introducing her to the girl that he claims is a goddess, but he is interested in using his sister to further his own cause. So he gives her a name, and it's like, hey, behave yourself, and the violent protesters won't, eat you. Pretty much how that works, yeah. And she realizes her brother's completely gone off the deep end, but she still thinks that somehow it's the influence of somebody in this group, right? Somehow there's something going on here. And so she infiltrates the organization, starts feeding intel back to Contrassa, and Contrassa starts using that information to kind of make movements and figure out what's going on. And over the course of this, it's a girl with a paradox gene of just pyrokinesis, just normal pyrokinesis, happens to come into town for an upcoming festival that's supposed to show off, the next generation of heroes. And it's fine. It's just it's like any given track and field day for a school. It's not actually nobody's in immediate harm. Nobody's likely to get hurt. Because everybody, this is just for showing off your skills, right? Even if you're sparring with one another, it's typically expected that you're going to be, restraining yourselves, not really going all out. Even if you kind of go uppity with it, it's not with lethal intent. And that's one of the things that's common throughout the entire series, is this idea of lethal intent. That there's a difference between sparring for the fun of it and actively wishing to kill somebody. And how that can change not only the intensity, but your instinctual approach to a conflict. And the idea was just, it was this kind of we're going to show off the next generation heroes and inspire the public that, despite the rising dangers around them, you're going to have this next generation heroes that's going to look out for you and keep everything, keep everybody safe. Even the beastkin among them. And we're going to briefly touch on what I would call the Lancer team, the Team B, the rival team, to our lovely four, because this is about where they get the most interaction with them. They would have interacted off and on throughout Volume 1 with this group, because all of them are going to be important, but this is where it begins. And it's a rival team of 5 people, and they are all being trained under can't even remember their name anymore, but they were very nondescript. It was very much a sword and shield knightly sword guy. And so you had the rival big sword guy in the form of a boy named White with a W-Y-T-E, and this kid only wielded a big sword, but his paradox gene allowed him wind manipulation. So what he would do is he would spin his sword a lot to generate wind, which he could then use to not only extend his reach, but even manipulate the wind his sword created to stabilize his blade and prevent him from, hurting himself. But it also let him do reckless things with the sword that, since he was young and inexperienced, would sometimes cause him to hurt himself. And given that Cain had no self-preservation instinct because he can super heal, and also wielded a big sword, this led to these two very reckless youths sparring a lot. White hated Cain because he sat here, it's like, you're gonna sit here and put on this big old smile and pretend that you're this big hero kid, but I know when I'm seeing somebody who hates himself. And I hate that you're lying to me. You want to cross blades with me? Do so honestly. And Cain had to explain to him, it's like, I'm doing the best I can. And White would be the one guy that Kane would kind of drop his guard with. This general idea of, I need to be honest with these people. I can't pretend to be somebody I'm not. And because he couldn't lie to White. He couldn't even if he tried. And as time went on, he couldn't lie to his team either. They could tell he wasn't always happy, but they knew that he believed in what he was saying. White didn't even think he believed in it, frankly. He's like, I don't believe you. Not for a second. I don't think you believe in the power of heroism. I think you're putting it on to pretend that you're going to be okay, and it's not. It's not okay to pretend to be something you're not to stop people from worrying about you. I'm not going to cross blades with a man like that. The second member of that team is a tech nerd named Tanis. I loved Tanis, and I say loved for a reason. Foreshadowing. But Tanis is, I would say, the foil and temporary interest of White. Didn't start out that way. White was trying to be angsty loner Shadow the Hedgehog nonsense. But Tanis ended up softening him up over the course of Volume 1 in the original version. Because she really did believe in the bright future that the world had ahead. And that's why she was working with technology. She didn't really have a paradox gene. She was just very good with technology. She had a backpack drone that she used for pretty much all kinds of nonsense, and built various other machines that she kept on her person, like off and on all the time. And when a certain event ended up happening, which we'll get to after we're done explaining this team, Tanis was crucial in helping to work on that and helping to get that sorted. And she really did have a bright, sunshiny demeanor. So that's Tanis. Beam of sunshine she be. And then you had Blaze. Blaze claims to be a direct descendant of Scarlet herself. She has a big, fluffy red mane, and she's got the pyrokinesis about her. Hers is a little bit more, not jets of fire so much as it is cloaking herself in fire. But she's able to, use pyrokinesis. And she does a lot of, kicks. Lots of kicks. Way too many kicks. She does Falcon Kick a lot. She's very much that kind of person where it's like every bit of fire is to either propel her or to make her kicks hit really frickin' painfully. Like she pierces you like an arrow. Sorry, I got a bug in here I had to kill. But yeah, so she was Falcon Arrow and just kind of like all kinds of stuff where she just propels herself like an arrow through you with her kicks. And she despised Kane because she thought Kane was an imposter, a fraud. She had never met him before. She didn't know about this side of her family, and she refused to believe he was a part of her family. He had no pyrokinesis, she could tell, no fire. Oh, he can heal, and this little glowy thing comes out his back that seems a little warm, but that's not really fire. That's not really, burning things with fire. That's just frickin' healing. That's not violence. And she had a chip on her shoulder and a desire to prove her worth as a warrior, to prove her worth as the descendant of Scarlet, one of the most powerful heroes that founded this foundation, blah, 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 blah. And then you had Opal Oceana. And Opal was here because she wanted to continue the family line of going into the Scarlet Order. She really did. And she and Blaze get along great. And a part of it is just because the families have been so closely connected. She doesn't feel... It's not that kind of friendship. It's literally like normal friendship, like they're cousins that grew up next to each other kind of friendship. And Opal... But Opal is still having issues within her family. Her uncle was killed ages ago. And she's heard tale that she has a cousin she's never met. Nobody ever found the body. Nobody knows where Avario is. And her father told her not to worry about it. Don't think about it. Focus on the family name. That part of the family clearly died in a very tragic and dishonorable way. Why would you care about a man who brought dishonor and tried to kill the queen? All of these deflections, and she wasn't sure she fully bought it, but she knew she had a legacy to keep up. That she was a part of the Oceana line, and that it was her obligation to join the Scarlet Order and to make a good name for herself as a hero within the Scarlet Order. But she couldn't do that in the North because of their pressing for trying to keep everybody, cooperative with the military. And she didn't think that would work. She wasn't comfortable with that ideal. She had already been through enough as a member of the Oceana family. And her older sister had already gone into the military. In fact, her older sister is the one that Contrassa has kind of a girl crush on. And that's the whole... Yeah, I wouldn't be bringing it up if it didn't play a minor plot point. But it was Opal's older sister that made her want to double down but be separate. So she came to the southern continent with her massive funds and reputation to try and make a heroic name for herself. And then you have the last member of the group, who I name Connor. He goes by the hero name of Scarlet. He goes by the Scarlet Singer, out of respect for Scarlet herself, which pisses Blaze off, but he doesn't care. But his entire paradox gene is that he can use sound manipulation to, through song, he can influence people around him. He can encourage people to fight harder or set the rhythm of battle, all that kind of stuff. And to revisit it, Opal's is the usual cryokinesis, as I said, with the Oceana line. And again, Tannen doesn't have one. Tannen does not have a paradox gene. And they're all under this generic knightly guy. We're just going to call him McGee for now. So they're training under McGee, and they are the rival team to Contrassa's group. Kind of an established hero leading these rabble-rousers, and on the other side you have a rabble-rouser leading a group of heroes. It's quite a hilarious juxtaposition in hindsight. But when the competition comes around, they have their own thing. But during the investigation, and this is one of the important emotional moments, and I'm sorry I'm only getting to it nearly an hour in. But during their investigation into the violent protests, when they start uncovering the deeper conspiracy, Zoge notices something off. So he goes to investigate a nearby shop. And for his trouble, a figure he does not recognize chops off his left arm. But not cleanly. It wasn't a good cut, which is worse. Because now, this is the left arm that's toxic and needs to be bandaged so he doesn't die. And now there is exposed stump with no bandage on it, releasing poisonous aura directly into his now exposed bloodstream. And this led to... There are two versions of the story moving forward from this point, but the second version is the one that I believe is my best version. In the original version of the story, this event led to Zoge becoming obsessed with revenge. His lifespan cut much, much shorter, and basically losing his mind at the idea of this conspiracy to the point in time where he just snaps and starts trying to kill everybody at this point, because everybody is an obstacle between him and the true evil at the heart of the world, and he won't let anybody get in his way. And I left him one-armed. He got a prosthetic, but he was left with only one arm. And everybody tried talking him around, but he was just too caught up in his own little world and getting revenge. But then I realized that's not how that would go down in context of this story. And with one minor change, I made Zoge into a much different character. You see, Cain has the ability, his paradox gene is that he can heal. He can heal himself, he can accelerate his own healing. And Cain has no self-preservation instinct. When the dude says he would gladly give his left arm for you, he means it. And so while Zoge's in the hospital and they don't know what they're going to do because his health is suffering, Cain volunteers his own left arm as a transplant. And at first they don't know if that's the case, but he makes the case that because he has a healing paradox gene, that it should prevent rejection of the arm, and it might even be able to repair the damage of everything that's going on. It might actually, help him to survive the operation. And it might even help it to, like, fuse to his body without excess surgery and sutures. They brought up how that would affect his own body, but Kane brought up again that his body heals. He would be back on his feet before he knew it if he used his paradox gene, but he wanted to make sure his friend was going to be okay. And so they took Kane's left arm and transplanted it onto Zoge. And the loss of the left arm affected Kane more than he thought it would, because he had been used to wielding swords with two hands and wielding two different swords and doing everything with both his arms. And now he was down to just one. And Zoge was affected by it more than he thought he would, because now this was more than just talk. Kane had actively proven the effect that being a self-sacrificing hero could have. What Kane did, there's no way to undo that. Kane maybe thought there could be, but it didn't matter if there was. Kane gave that up and seemed satisfied with himself for having given Zoge a new chance at life. And what's better, Zoge was told that due to the influence, even though it had faded over time, due to the influence of Kane's paradox genes, he was finally going to be able to live a normal length of life. And while he could no longer use his poisonous left arm, he was almost thankful for that, because now he didn't have to worry about it. He could just live a normal life again. But it wasn't good enough to just live a normal life. He now had a debt to repay. And so Zoge kind of, I wouldn't say he grew a heart, but he began to change. And during this time, Zoge had found a wonderful, wonderful chess partner who had missed him while he was missing his left arm, and was interested in negotiating and discussing the debate of the merit of heroes with him, especially post-surgery, because they noticed he was acting a bit differently. They had thought that, similar to him, that there was no practical ideal to heroism, there was only the right and the dead. And he agreed with that beforehand, and they were having wonderful chess games. But after he came back, he changed how he even played chess. He was less utilitarian, a little bit more poetic in how he played it, and how he discussed the points. And he was still making good, solid moves, but he was almost sentimental in the whole thing, which seemed to bother her. And he didn't think anything of it. He was glad to still have a chess match with her every week, and he wasn't worried about it. It's fine. It would all work out. And Zoge would train in the use of single-handed longswords with Kane, who, even though he was down an arm, had been taught how to fight with a longsword with one hand, using a kind of fencing style from his mentor. In fact, he started using Nirvana, his mentor's sword, once he was down to one arm. But Zoge wasn't content with this. Zoge owed Kane his life, because he had finally given it back. He had finally gotten a chance to live it. And so, despite himself and despite his own jaded nature, Zoge approached Tannen, and the two, with their high intellect, worked together to create a working prosthesis for Kane that, due to his healing paradox gene, would theoretically be able to move very similar to as if it was a normal limb. He would never have sensation in it, but at least he'd be able to move it like it was a normal arm. And with some modifications after Kane had tested the first one, they were able to give him a working prosthesis that he was able to channel his healing ability through. And it actually, due to the fact that accelerating your cell's healing process does release a lot of heat, he was actually able to channel that heat and store it inside the arm and use it as like a kind of pseudo cannon. So his left arm had like an actual like heat cannon he could fire. Not like a laser beam, but like blasts. He could release blasts of heat. Even if he wanted to punch somebody, he could do like a shotgun-like blast of heat, point blank. And Kane would continue using Nirvana out of respect for his mentor and out of an understanding that he needed to start taking this more seriously, and he couldn't bring himself to forget what he had done, what he had been through. He couldn't bring himself to forget the tragedy he had faced, but he needed to stop pretending to be a hero. He needed to really rely on his mentor's guidance and be constantly reminded of the old lessons so he could properly mature so that kind of thing didn't happen again, because Kane viewed himself as kind of the pseudo-leader of the team. He was the one taking point, he was the one encouraging everybody, and so Zoge getting hurt on his watch because he wasn't keeping an eye on everybody affected him deeply. During one of the exercises where Kane and Blaze ended up against each other, during the Grand Festival for everybody to see the Next Generation Heroes, he and Blaze kind of got very personal with one another. She despised him for taking on the Phoenix name, and he despised her recklessness. She was so confident, so arrogant, so reckless. Her life had meaning. And it's weird how it started off that way. It started off with them like, don't mock me, like neither one of them wanted to feel mocked or looked down on. And over the course of the battle, they slowly forgot about that entirely and just began to enjoy fighting each other. It was fun. They were enjoying it. And when the match finally got called, and the two had caused extensive damage to the arena at that time, the ref had been trying to call it off for a while, but they were too busy doing what they were doing. By the time they heard and recognized that the match was over, everything seemed fine. Until Kane saw something that he thought she was going for a killing blow. He really did. He thought that she was about to strike him down out of hatred for him keeping the name. He didn't know why he felt this way, and even afterward, he wasn't sure where that came from. But he ended up chopping off one of her legs. Just completely removing one of her legs. And to the eyes of the outside observers, she hadn't tried striking him at all. There was no reason for that. And he was, of course, detained. And the Scarlet Order had said that they had said that there was some kind of, there had to have been some kind of issue. They were outright, they were trying to go to bat for him because they knew something was up, but they couldn't say what. So there's been some kind of scuffle on the thing, a misunderstanding. It happens all the time in the heat of battle, folks. But they still had to detain him, because they didn't know if this meant whatever mysterious force had been influencing everybody had infected him and he was genuinely an enemy, or if it was something else. So he was detained. And Contrasta came to visit him and said, look, they said that you can't have your prosthetic arm, but frick that. Here's your prosthetic arm. I know you're gonna use it responsibly, and if they want to start a fight with you, I will already be on top of them. So don't let them rob you of this arm. This is your arm. You keep it. And she said it was going to be fine. She'd go to bat for him and she'd figure out what was going on. And Kane, of course, was locked down, but that didn't stop all of his friends from coming to visit. Zoge came to investigate more detective life and said, look, I know this isn't something you would do. I know you too damn well. So tell me everything that happened, what you saw. I'm going to find out what happened. And Kane laughed at him, told him not to worry about it, but Zoge was having none of it. And so Kane told him. Zoge took mental notes, said, you're going to be okay. I'm going to find out what happened, and I'm going to make them pay. And it was a very cold thing, and Kane wanted to tell him not to do that, but Kane had a hard time stopping him, because Cain wanted to believe that it could be resolved that easily. Olive came and visited, and when she heard what happened, because she was listening to Zoge and him talking, because that's who she is, she's basically a spy. She loves her spy novels. She's very into spy novels. You tell her all you want about Ian Fleming, and she will respond just as much back. She's a huge. She was the one who wrote the proper version of Argyle, and not the one we got. She used Henry Cavill appropriately. No, but she's a huge fan of spy novels. So of course she has to spy. And when she heard what happened, she gave Cain a hug and told him that, like, because she and Cain throughout the series had been having fun together. Whenever there was brain-dead fun to be had, you knew Olive and Cain were at the heart of it. Those two had not when the two of them hung out together, there was maybe one brain cell in the room, and it was dedicated to, let's do something funny. They just loved what they did. And they were, even in battle, the two were usually on the exact same wavelength. One of the actual things they were practicing for if they ever found themselves in conflict is Olive uses these, for lack of a better explanation, wire gloves. She uses gloves with razor wire in them, which it becomes really, it starts off simple, just, normal acrobatics plus wire glove equals, entangling you and then causing extensive damage. But it will later become far, far worse. But she absolutely hugged him and said, it's like, look, this isn't your fault. I don't know how we're going to fix this, but I need you to know that wasn't your fault. You are not responsible for what happened. And she, of course, leaves. And then Amaranthine sneaks in through the window. By the way, terrible security here over the potential threat. He probably could have escaped out the window for all it mattered at this stage. Which, I mean, frankly, that's hilarious. And I am not going to change that as a plot hole because, frankly, it's not. I don't think the Scarlet Order really thought he was that much of a threat, but they were just observing. And Amaranthine breaks in and doesn't want him to talk. She doesn't want him to explain. She just wants him to look her in the eyes and say that he didn't intend to do that. So he does. And she hugs him, and she cries into his shoulder, and says that, she's just going to keep believing in him. Because what she saw, with her fear, with her phobia of blood and all that, freaked her the frick out. But she chooses to believe that Cain is a good man, who would never do that. He has a darkness about him, he has a lack of self-preservation, but he's not a bad person. And this is where Cain slowly started to realize that Amaranthine might have a mild crush on him. Now, he had, throughout the entire first volume, been kind of flirting with Opal, because as somebody who constantly lies to himself about how he feels, he could feel Opal wasn't being entirely honest with her feelings either. That there was something bothering her, and she wasn't being honest about it. And she hated being called out like this, especially because he was right. She wasn't entirely comfortable, she wasn't being entirely honest with herself, and she didn't like that. She wasn't enjoying it. But Opal, after Cain gave up his left arm, Opal came to check on him, and the two of them had formed an actual friendship after he had transplanted his left arm on Zoge. Especially because seeing him not be a smiling, dumb idiot, instead taking this role of hero seriously, had Opal respecting him after the transplant. But Amaranthine had a crush on him basically from moment one. She could see the good guy at the core of him, even when he didn't see it. And she had a whole little puppy dog crush on him. And since he didn't care if he lived or died, he wasn't going to pull the trigger on that. He didn't want her getting overly attached only for him to die as a hero, to inspire other people to be better heroes, and have her live her whole life, in sadness because he went and got himself killed. So while he returned the hug and he was aware of how she felt, he wasn't going to say anything. And it's a minor thing, but for this festival, Cain had used his blacksmithing skills to make little pins for everybody in his team. He wanted to commemorate, this was our first time here, we showed up, but he was saving it until after the festival was over. He wanted just everybody to, be proud of themselves. And he finds himself looking at them in his room while he's sitting here trying to figure this out, right? Now we have to smash cut between the... Amaranthine has a very passive role in this volume. She's not... It's not due to any insert trope here. It's because this isn't where her character development really starts. Not her character development will begin, but in this one, she's just somebody trying her best. She's just trying her best, and it makes her a sweet little whoopee, and I love her. Don't worry, by the end of the series, you will be very thankful that you'll be thankful for what I've done with Amaranthine and that I included her. So, while Kane is in here, a bunch of shenanigans go down. Olive goes to contact some of her contacts as to what's going on because she knows her brother's there. She knew it was her brother that had messed with Kane. And Zoge, not being stupid, figured that Olive knew something. So, Olive comes clean. She admits that it was her brother who chopped off Zoge's arm, because Perry's weapon is a stack of playing cards that have like magnetic edges that he forms into a blade, that he can just like flip the deck out, it forms an edge, he cuts you with it. You can use it in any number of other ways, but that's his primary form of attack. And so she knew that Perry was the one that chopped off Zoge's left arm, and she knew that what Kane was describing was her brother using his paradox gene to manipulate Kane's vision and perception of things to make him act in a way that would cause a disruption. She didn't know what it was, but she knew that whatever Perry had done during the kerfuffle of Kane being, shuttled off and Blaze being sent to the infirmary, they were up to something. They needed a big disruption. And it was about that time that a voice comes on the overhead. They explain themselves as the Lightning Queen, which sends chills up Zoge's spine because he's from the Northern Continent, and he grew up in the same library where the history of that had come to pass. But it's not the voice he was expecting for the Lightning Queen. In fact, the voice is the voice of his little chess partner, which tells him there's something extra going on. That this isn't even as straightforward as that. So, Zoge, realizing something's up, does some quick head math on the layout of the building, and he tells Olive to go look for her brother Perry, and that he was going to go look into something himself, and that just don't hesitate to reach back out if she runs into him, because he needs to do some investigating, but he'll be fine. The Lightning Queen announces that the Scarlet Order has been keeping secrets from the world, and hiding their true nature and their true face, collecting power for themselves, and lording it over the common folk. Every bit of, spiteful spin language you can put on it, to label the Scarlet Order as people who think themselves above the average man, and that's why they must label themselves as heroes, for they look down on you and they think you're lesser than, and they think you're weak-minded. Every single upsetting buzzword you possibly can. And Zoge's little chess pal buys into it. This is all directly from her heart, and so it's very convincing. But it is a little more complicated than that, as dusk came to discover. Because while all of this is going down at the Crimson Keep, in an area that's a little more remote and a potential site for one of the artifacts, Dusk has uncovered the current host of the damaged Lightning Queen. And she's rather confident, rather capable. She's actively executing people who know she exists, but she uses them first. She does the whole Dark Knight Joker gambit where she manipulates everybody into doing what she wants and she kills them off one by one until she gets to the door. And she realizes that they locked it using a lock she doesn't have access to. And she doesn't have the knowledge base to figure out how to decipher what they've done. She can tell that if she had all of her memories back, she could access this. She could get into it if she had her full knowledge from when she was Violetta. But she can't remember anymore. And it upsets her. Dusk, uncovering her and realizing her for what she is, because he's high enough rank to have heard about that, goes, wow, dang, I was not expecting that. I was not expecting to see you. And she sits here and she elaborates that all of this, she knew that if she manipulated a social uprising to line up with the Festival of Heroes, and caused enough of a kerfuffle, enough social conflict, it would stir up enough dust to draw attention away from the vault. Because she knew they had taken the artifacts, and she knew which one was in here too, but she hadn't known they had locked it this way. And it was, so she's like, I'm willing to bet you know. And Dusk had to luckily inform her, it's like, no, I really frickin' don't. I've not seen the person who has the key to this lock ever. In fact, I didn't even know which one it was, so thanks for telling me that that's the circlet of choice, which is the circlet that protects your brain from being manipulated. And Dusk, of course, ends up dying in a conflict with her. Zoge ends up crossing paths with his chess partner, and she's actively, she's uncovered the archives for who has the Aeon that unlocks the vault, because she didn't even know this was a thing until that. It was a very well kept secret. So she didn't know who had the Aeon, and she didn't know how to remove it either, but she had gone to the archives during all the kerfuffle and looked through them to figure out how they work to try and get them, right? And she had found the hero that had it was an older woman that was sitting there and advising the current leader of the Crimson Keep. And as she's trying to rob this old lady of her Aeon, Zoge can't help himself. So while she's in the process of trying to take this Aeon for herself, Zoge just goes ahead because his weapon of choice had been a glove that could leave runic networks and release various elemental things from it. So Zoge, while nobody's looking, creates a giant blast rune on the roof and creates a massive cave-in on his chess partner and on this old lady. Half of the Aeon goes to his old chess partner, but the rest is so damaged that it's beyond repair. And it finds no new host, it finds no way to escape in the just massive destructive blast. And Zoge hardly gets out himself, but he manages to escape the rubble. He manages to make his way to an escape craft and gets out of there shortly after having blown a hole in the roof and caved it in on people. But he theoretically saved the day. He knew vaguely what was going on when he saw the Aeon. He went, oh shoot, okay, so all the books I read are legit. Fine, cool. So now he had an idea of what was going on. He knew he didn't know everything, but he had an idea of what was going on. Because all of this was buried in myth. So he knew when he got out of here, he had to go do some research and refresh his knowledge base on this stuff. Because this stuff had been told vaguely in myth in the library he is in, but all the specifics were kept by the Scarlet Order. So he knew he wasn't going to get straight answers from doing research, but he knew if he looked into fairy tales and myths, there was more truth to them than he had been led to believe. Now we cut to Olive, who ends up confronting her brother, who stands over the wreckage, watching the destruction caused by his goddess, who is Zoge's chess partner. He looks up to her, he admires her, it is his goddess. She is perfection incarnate, and even the real Lightning Queen is nothing compared to my goddess. How dare she lower herself by spending her social time with this lowly peasant when she is truly above all the rest of us? And while he's going on his megalomaniacal, entirely mad rant, Zoge's chess partner escapes in a fiery bout of explosion, both with her like paradox gene and paired with the Aeon that had been assigned for the door. She wasn't able to complete it, but she was able to tap into some of the fire elements of it using her paradox gene, and able to it amplified her abilities a little bit. But she was horribly damaged in the process. She got buried in an avalanche of ceilings. She's not well. But all he sees is the explosion. Ah, my goddess has risen in power and claimed what is rightfully hers. And Olive, realizing her brother had completely lost his mind, and realizing the danger he posed, had no choice but to use her razor wire to completely blind him. Before he knew it, she had leapt over him, twirled over him, and pulled her razor wire in a way where it dragged across his eye sockets and just completely bifurcated his eyes. The idea being that she had neutralized him as a potential threat, and that he could be safely contained in an insane asylum when this was all over. And a week from the fact that he had just had his eyes bifurcated and he was bleeding out his face, she was able to restrain him and bring him to a rescue craft where they were able to stabilize him. Now, Amaranthine had been trying to protect people who were being evacuated. She was fighting the monsters that had been unleashed, because the Beastkin were like, if you're going to treat us as beasts, we will show you the true monsters. So they had brought caged beasts in to try and stir up conflict. She was fighting those well enough, and just able to, in the heat of the moment, with so many people screaming and so much death, she was barely holding it together. She was in such a survival panic state, she was hardly even looking at what she was doing. She dared not even activate her paradox gene for fear of just it slowing things down too much. She needed to just stay moving. And while she was doing that, she was caught off guard by somebody wielding one of the 4 legendary blades. A mysterious swordsman, completely cloaked in armor. Their identity unknown. And she thought that she could take them. She really did. She was under the impression that she could handle them because of her training with her father. But they were far more brutal than she expected. They seemed to have done some research on her, because they had killed a civilian and used their blood as like a kind of smokescreen on Amy. They were trying to throw blood at her. They snagged it when they realized they couldn't best her in a swordsmanship match. They took a civilian, cut them in a way that splashed their blood on the blade, and started flinging it around to splash blood everywhere. And she froze up. She froze up from the blood. She grew pale. She grew weak. She dropped her sword. She couldn't fight. In the middle of all the death and the screaming, and now with the smell of coppery blood in the air, she was shaking. She was afraid. And the swordsman approached and made clear that they were going to make her end swift. And when they went to cut her, Cain jumped in the way. She had activated her paradox gene to try and dodge the shot, only to watch the boy that she had a crush on, who she looked up to and admired, who had encouraged her so much, just lose both his legs and his only remaining arm in one swing. Just based on how he jumped, that's just the way it went. One leg was severed off at the knee, the other halfway up the thigh, and then his entire right arm was just removed. And the swordsman laughed at him and said, "What a useless attempt to stop the inevitable. That's why heroes like you are so pathetic." And he went to go finish the job on Amaranthine, only to have a flaming arm grab him by the ankle and toss him. Because you see, as Cain was dying a pointless death from his own dumb self-sacrificing attitude, he realized he hadn't saved anybody. He was about to die without having saved anybody. This wasn't a heroic death, this was an ignoble one, where all he did was waste his time. But she was still in danger. His friends, these civilians, they were all still in danger. So he couldn't die yet. He refused. and his paradox gene activated in response to that. His body began overclocking itself to try and make himself mobile, to try and make himself able to attack. And it was actively burning itself out. It was releasing so much heat from trying to repair itself exponentially fast that he had molten arms and legs at this point. Just too hot to be something solid, but definitely had enough substance to be used. And Cain just went on a absolute rampage on this guy. This one armored swordsman had no idea what hit him. A lamppost was ripped from the frickin' ground and beaten on this swordsman, who he cut it up, but he still got stabbed by the end of a metal lamppost. This guy was so scared, so intimidated by frickin' flaming, pissed off Cain that he had no choice but to retreat. And Contrasa, seeing this, recognizing that this kind of damage is not something that, Cain was going to come back from, didn't want his sacrifice to be in vain. So Contrasa, upon finding a shell-shocked and traumatized Amaranthine, grabbed her and as many other civilians as she could and ran for an evacuation craft. And as the last of the evacuation craft left the site, the last thing that Contrasa saw was, the last of the swordsman and all of his men had escaped, and Cain's flames dying out as his charred corpse lay in the middle of what remained of the Crimson Keep. And we leave Volume 1 with massive carnage. The Crimson Keep has been completely compromised. Cain is a charred corpse in its remains. And everybody's trying to recover. Amaranthine is completely unresponsive. In fact, she seems to have a shell-shocked, mindless panic attack at even seeing the color red. So the doctors end up sending her back to her family's estate with bandages over her eyes and a recommendation that they seek some kind of, therapy for her, because she is clearly too traumatized to be able to continue. She won't be doing much of anything for quite a while. Olive, who had gotten out mostly unfazed, had heard that Zoge was in the hospital after his little escapade. And the two had an interesting conversation, because Olive had managed to recover Cain's coat on her way out. She didn't know where Cain was, but she recovered his coat from everything that was going on. And she brought it with her and gave it to Zoge, just like, hey, I know you owed him, I know you and he were best friends. I can't even look at this thing. I can't, because it just pisses me off. And she made clear that, in Olive's mind, they had been living in this fantasy bubble built by the Scarlet Order. They had been lied to. There were secrets that was being kept from them, and some kind of larger conspiracy that nobody was talking about. She had tried asking questions, and nobody from the Scarlet Order would answer her. Nobody would respond for what happened. Nobody would explain to her what had occurred. In fact, most of them seemed to think that it was best to just ignore it, to just move on with your lives. We have other issues to deal with. And that wasn't good enough for her. There was a conspiracy going on. There were people actively manipulating the cause that her parents raised her on. People who were getting needlessly violent and yet still being used as pawns. They were bringing shame and disgrace to the very concept of being a beastkin, and all as being slaves to this Lightning Queen, whoever the hell she was. And Olive decided she was done playing nice. The ideals of her parents were great and all. They were fantastic. But clearly, you couldn't just ignore these dangerous elements. You needed to address them. You needed to confront them. And damned be the consequences. So Olive was going to go find others within the cause that felt as she did, and she was going to form her own organization that would track them down, hold them accountable, and find out who had been manipulating them. And damned be the consequence of that. She would find out what happened. Zoge would state that, yeah, Cain died an ignoble death in ignorance. He died not really accomplishing what he had set out to do. But he died protecting people. He died the way a real hero would, and a lot of people, including Amaranthine, wouldn't have gotten out if not for Cain doing what he did and being who he is. And he didn't want that to die in darkness with him. So Zoge was going to continue where Cain would have wanted him to. He was going to figure out what was going on, and he was going to be the hero that got to the heart of the matter and inspired people to not allow tragedies like this to stop them. He was going to find out how to channel that same energy, because right now, in a moment of great tragedy, that's what they needed. They didn't need somebody who was going to be cold and practical. They needed a folk hero. They needed somebody to symbolize their will as a people and to make it happen. To show them that there was a greater world beyond this, because what this cause was born from people being told that there was no solution, that they were powerless and this was the only way. And that was the whole point of having higher ideals. The whole point of having higher ideals is to know that there's a better way. And he didn't know how he personally was going to see it through, but he knew that he owed it to Cain to try. And so he took Cain's jacket, as well as the long swords Cain had been teaching him how to use, and he would go off to try and find his own answers. Opal, absolutely shook by Cain just dying the way he did, especially in the context he did, found herself realizing that she didn't want to die the same way. That was a good man who couldn't even be honest with himself, but still tried his best, and here she was, helpless. She hadn't been able to do much of anything either. And it was all of this uncertainty. She was afraid. She hardly did anything to protect the civilians because she was scared, because she didn't know what was going on. But there was Cain, willing to die for what he believed in, and she didn't have that same fire. And that bothered her. So she started taking things more seriously and did some soul-searching to figure herself out. White, upon hearing that Cain had died that way, realized he wasn't just a smoke show. White came in pissed off when he was in the hospital, when he was finally got out, because he had crippled himself in the fighting too, trying to protect people. But when he finally woke up in the hospital, he was pissed at Cain. He's like, I'm going to find that guy, I'm going to beat him up, cut off Blaze's arm, and and all this. And a part of why, though White didn't want to talk about it, is that in all of the fighting, Tannen had been killed. Tannen died trying to protect everybody, and in particular, she was on her way to go check on Cain when everything popped off. And White was ready to chew that motherfucker out. But instead, he found out Cain had died, protecting lives and saving Amaranthine. Realizing that he himself had not been taking his training seriously. Feeling powerless, but also respecting the sacrifice and the nobility Cain had, White figured, in memory of Tannen and out of respect for Cain, he was going to shake off his edgelord demeanor, and he was going to go take his training seriously. So White would end up going to the Western Continent, which is important later. But he went to the Western Continent to teach himself discipline and to really hunker down and really get to know how to be a hero. Connor hadn't said it at the time, but he had a whole backstory he had been sitting on. And Olive would cross him as he was leaving, and he volunteered his services. And she's like, what do you mean your services? And Connor explained. There had been a crime lord helping the violent protesters. That was his brother. And the only reason why he wasn't helping them out is because when they were young, in order to get out of debt, his brother had sold him. And in order to get himself out of slavery, Connor had worked hard to earn his keep and earn his way out to freedom. He doesn't know if his brother ever came to check on him, but by then he would have already escaped. Connor had already made his own as a singer and made his way into the Scarlet Order as soon as he could. And he didn't like talking about it. And the only reason nobody ever put it together is because Connor, he has heterochromia. One eye is a deep blue, and the other is a rich emerald like his brother's. And even though he's the younger brother, he's a performer, and he's very skilled with his voice. And so he knew for sure that his brother had died in all of that. And so he figured, between my paradox gene, my skill at mimicry, and the fact that I can just change which side my hair's combed over, I heard what you said to Zoge. I can slip in, I can pretend to be my brother, and we can use all of his underworld connections to get you what you need to make this happen. We are going to make these bastards pay for killing so many people. And Olive and him went into a partnership. Blaze, down a leg and now down a rival, realized that she realized that she had been reckless, that Cain was right to call her out on that, but more so, it was because she was very bitter that Cain had chopped off her leg and got to call away a hero because he frickin' died saving people, whereas she wasn't even able to help. She wasn't even able to help because her leg had been chopped off. And so she became, in order to overcome her sense of powerlessness, she pinned a lot of her outrage on Cain, but started training with her family to better understand the family martial arts. She had only ever learned the kicks and such because she honestly believed that's all she would need. She felt very confident in her abilities before she came to train. But realizing that there was a whole half to her family's martial arts style that she had not learned, she went back to double down her efforts and become strong enough where even if somebody tried to chop off her leg again, she would be more than capable of fighting them. Because it started with Scarlet, in a sense, but her family martial art literally, they believe that you have to be able to fight with every single part of your body, effectively. There is no arrangement of missing fingers, limbs, any of that justifies not being able to fight, in their opinion. So she was trying to overcome that. She'd allowed her pride and her strength to get the better of her, and she had actually instead allowed that pride to bring shame, and she was not going to stand for that. So she doubles down her efforts to train to be stronger and to be more capable to figure out, similar to Olive and Connor, she was going to find out what had caused this. She was going to get to the heart of it, and she was going to beat the crap out of anybody who wanted to try and hurt people in her presence again. Never again. She didn't think there was a deeper conspiracy, but it was one of those, never again! I will never again be powerless! So Tannen's dead. Connor's working with Olive. White went to the Western Continent. Blaze is training. And Opal is trying to find herself. And all of that is vitally important. Not immediately, but in that range. Then you have Zoge, who's going to go do more research on the Lightning Queen, because he's got actually some points of reference for that. And Amaranthine is inconsolable and emotionally and mentally scarred, seemingly beyond repair. And that's the note we leave Volume 1 on. Everything's wrong, Cain is dead, and there's a larger threat that nobody's talking about. In fact, Contrassa is currently being she's being held captive, not by any of the bandits or anything like that, but she returned to the Northern Continent to ask what the hell had gone on and to report what she had been able to collect during that, and she was locked away by the military and held for questioning. So even our mentor figures, Dusk is dead, Contrassa's locked away, and there's this horrible tragedy that has shook the world to its core. Not dissimilar to when the Queen in the North was assassinated, but on a much larger scale, and with a lot more theatricality to it. And that's how the world would stay for a whole year. And then everything gets real quiet. That's where we're gonna leave the story of Volume 4 for now. Not Volume 4, sorry. Volume 1. That's where we're leaving Volume 1. There's more to what happened in Volume 1, but even in the original version, this is where we ended Volume 1. There's more to what happened, both, building it up and story-wise, but there's also more to it as to how it's going to affect things moving forward. But that's about the size of what ended up happening. So we will explore this further in Volume 2. And the general idea with this is I'm going to go over the broad scope pictures of just the contents of each volume, and then I'm probably going to do individual videos for each important character moving forward. I'll do that after I'm finished going over the overall plot. I figured that's probably the best way to do it. I say probably because I don't know for sure. Just feels like it's the best way to do it. So, yeah, I'll see you guys next video.